The Bettany Estate, Meratt County, Taldor, 6th week of summer, 4718. On the way back from the Tellus barony, at the end of the 5th week of summer, a remarkable thing happened when the company came across a young woman delivering a child in the middle of the road. Demi proved herself a capable nurse as she delivered the child safely and capably, while Diyanah kept the panicking father calm during the delivery. As the 6th week of summer came to Meratt County, Stachys was really beginning to turn around. The magical pump house was irrigating the farms, the vineyards were up and running, a functioning market and public house had become centerpieces for the village. They also initiated construction on a large temple of Abadar in the center of town as well, and with word being out about the fortunes of Stachys having completely turned around in the last 2 months, a prominent Abadarian cleric, Pison del Faro, came to town to serve as high cleric for the new temple. Pison was a halfling cleric from Riddenport. Energetic for his age, he was a canny businessman, a fast talker, and likely to get into everyone's business. He had an explosively bushy head of wiry grey hair, similarly bushy eyebrows that trailed upwards in wisps towards his expansive ears, and he wore a thick pair of spectacles. He came to oversee the construction of the temple, and it quickly became very clear he had no tolerance for shenanigans or tomfoolery. Marius took an immediate liking to him. In addition to the temple, they also began construction on a statue, something which could give the townsfolk a sense of their shared history and experiences. They decided to build a statue of Antoninus Betanos, who legendarily wielded the blade of Coriana to hunt down the great green dragon Orthomirax, and therefore led to the town's founding so many generations ago. It was probably no small coincidence that in this particular depiction Antoninus looked a fair bit like Baron Aurelius himself. At the start of the week, there was also a brief kerfuffle over the matter of the death of one Urshel Suitor, which led to the false accusation of murder by the town's half-orc farmer Partool's Mane, whom Marius recalled had been present on that first town moot they had held. Partool's name was ultimately cleared when it became evident Urshel had in fact been killed by the kick of an unruly mule, and not by a blow with a hammer, as had been suggested. With this matter drawn to a close, it was time to have a serious discussion about when to move the plan to its next phase. They used one of their scrolls of sending and reached out to Martella, informing her that currently they had the support of all the barons in the county, but that in the case of Baron Tellus, Tellus was in fact dead, and so they had instead the support of acting Baronet Vort. Martella replied that it was good that they were ahead of schedule, as she had suggested they complete their work in 8 to 10 weeks, and she herself would be ready to make her own move by week 8. If you could depose my brother next week, that would ultimately work for the best. Let me know when you have a viable plan that I can be confident in, she said to them by sending spell. Aurelius assembled an all-hands at the estate to discuss the matter. After a lengthy round-table discussion, the plan had been solidified. The following week they would hold a festival to celebrate the turn of fortunes of Stachys and the changing fortunes of Meratt County. All of the barons would be invited to the festival, as would the Count. Hopefully all would come. Ultimately, they wanted to get to a vote of no confidence, so if all were present, then the party would engage in the next stage of their plan, which would go as follows. Step 1. Have individual conversations with each of the barons to let them know what was coming, and confirm the votes before the vote was held. Step 2. During the festival, present an accounting of some of the major adventures had by the party since their arrival in Meratt. Highlight where previous county management may have fallen short, but not to linger here to avoid spooking Count Lothide, as the big-ticket item was the Darklands breach. Step 3. Culminate the presentation by revealing the body of Baron Tellus. How long had this been going on under their very noses? How great a threat was it to the country that there was a Darklands breach that had gone entirely unidentified? Lay all this to rest at the feet of Count Lothide. Step 4. Before Lothide could leave due to being insulted, call for a vote of no confidence. Make sure there are enough men from the other barons to quell a possible fight if Count Lothide considered making a stand. Step 5. Win the vote, take over the palace, recontact Martella. The rest of the week was spent planning for the festival. Aurelius didn't want it to be as ostentatious as Lothide's Jubilee had been, but he also didn't want his people to think he had cut corners. It was, after all, meant to be a celebration of their own success. The company selected a tranquil and picturesque spot to hold the festival, and as the preparations were soon underway, the festival ground sprawled across the meadows, dotted with colourful tents. When the great day came, the townsfolk were naturally the first to arrive, and before even the first guests of honour had arrived, the tents and grounds were bustling with activity. The air was soon alive with the sound of merry laughter, lively music, and the clang of swords as champions demonstrated their prowess in mock battles. Townsfolk merchants set up stalls, offering a tantalizing array of wares, ranging from handcrafted jewelry and leather goods to aromatic spices and savory roasted meats. Children could be found darting through the crowd, their faces painted with bright colors, as they chased after performers dressed as jesters and troubadours. In the center of the festival grounds rose a grand wooden stage, where minstrels and bards regaled audiences with tales of valor and romance. It was here they planned to reveal the tragedy of Jambis to the gathered guests. Baronet Vort was among the first to arrive. As instructed, he had brought a coffin bearing the remains of Baron Tellus. A shrine to Abadar had been constructed on the festival grounds, and Cleric Pison was here tending to it, and he agreed to keep the coffin secure under lock and key until the appropriate time. Vort was soon followed by others, Crabby, Voynam, and O'Cara. Eventually, Count Lothide arrived as well. He had fewer than 20 soldiers with him, a good sign, as though he was better protected than the other lords. He did have fewer house guards than the other lords did when their forces were combined. Even Titus Lothide made an appearance. The party split up at this point. They were now well versed at these social gatherings. Aurelius, as the ranking lord, was keeping Count Lothide occupied. While he did so, Demi went to speak with Baroness Crabby, Diyanah with Voynam, Marius with O'Cara, and Rankle with Baronet Vort, who already had some inkling as to what was being planned. They all delivered some variation on the same story. Count Lothide's rule had been disastrous for the county. Towns like Stachys and Jambis were allowed to wither and die. They did avoid discussion of Soto, because Voynam had requested as much, and she had feared those events would reflect badly on her, but they did talk about how Count Lothide had done nothing for Sepsinia, though he had guessed at her plight correctly, and how now, under his rule, a terrible rot had been allowed to grow under the Tellus barony. They asked each of them if they would rule against the Count, if they asked for a vote of no confidence. Such a thing had to be unanimous, and Count Lothide would need to be remanded immediately to their custody. Across the board, all agreed to this, all except, as it would turn out, Count Nicolaus O'Cara, who listened thoughtfully to Marius's full explanation before he offered his response. This is what he said to Marius. "Everything you said is true, Marius, and I must assume that you are coming to me with this now because you have a high level of confidence that the other barons will also support this position, as you won't succeed in this without a unanimous support. However, I'm not sure I know Aurelius well enough to entrust him to the position of Count." "You know him to be a good man. Is that not enough?" said Marius. "We saved your daughter, after all." Baron O'Cara nodded solemnly. "You did indeed, and you will have my eternal thanks for that. But frankly, this is not enough. He has done a great job of putting to work various investments offered to him from the people of Stachys. He has proven himself capable of winning over hearts and minds. But Count Aurelius has only 2 months of governing experience, and he has faced no major hardships in that time. It is not enough. I run the second largest barony in the country, and my citizens are the wealthiest and the most well-educated. I have been in the position of moving the county forward for years. I do not deny what you say about Count Lothide. I also greatly respect you and your friends. But if you need a new count, the position should not be yours, it should be mine." Marius considered his words carefully, and then simply said, "Let me discuss this position with my friends." Step 2 of their plan was somewhat interrupted by this curveball. They sent Diyanah out to distract the nobles with an intense game of truco, which of course he naturally lost, for yet a third time, to the incomparable Dame Crabby and her unparalleled spoon skills. While he played a loud and enthusiastic game of truco, the others discussed O'Cara's proposal. When Marius had laid out O'Cara's position, Aurelius was the first to speak. "Frankly, I prefer it. It never sat well with me that we would do all these good things for the citizens here, only to disappear when matters became more important elsewhere. Plus, I'd make a miserable count. I'm not even sure I make a good baron." "All that may be well and good, but we need to validate this with Lady Martella," said Rankle. "Can we spare another sending scroll?" "I don't see that we have much choice," said Marius. They used up another one of their precious sending scrolls, and after conferring with Martella, she reiterated that the important thing was that the new count would be ready to go with her to the prefecture capital of Casimir, and be ready to support her over her father Mercator at the capital. If O'Cara could be trusted to do this, the plan still worked. Marius tracked down Baron O'Cara, and shared some of this with him. "It is as I suspected, then," said O'Cara. "There is more to this story than the failings of Bartleby. The machinations of yet another Lothide are behind this." "It's not about Martella Lothide," said Marius. "It's about Princess Eutropia and Taldor. It's bigger than any of us." "I understand the owing of a debt in politics, but that is all it can ever be. If Martella needs my support for this one vote at the capital, then so be it. I will support her. But my service to you will end there. and thereafter I will rule the county as my conscience guides me. If that is not satisfactory to you, then you will not have my support in this vote." "That is satisfactory to me," said Marius. "I never expected or wanted you to be in her pocket. I only wanted to help Utopia and block Pytherius. And for Meratt County, I simply want a better count. From what I've seen, you are the best of them. So, don't let us down." The men shook hands, and then at last they were ready for the final stages of their plan. They gathered everyone to the central stage. Demi presented this portion. The party had seen many sides to Demi over the last couple of months. Often a curt, perfectly polite woman, especially at formal events, she was a woman who played things demurely, with cards held close to her chest. But on this day, she embodied the true part of the bard. She used dancing light spells to illuminate the stage. She replicated herself many times over using mirror image spells. She enhanced her voice magically so that it could be heard across the field. She sang in a magnetic and resonating pitch and enthralled those that listened, and she danced across the stage as only she could. The crowd was huge but utterly silent. She had captured everyone's attention. She relayed the challenges faced by Jambus in a song she titled The Curse of Baron Tellus. By the time in the grand finale the coffin of Baron Tellus was pulled open for all to see, it was clear Count Lothide had grown suspicious of all that was going on here, and he and his house guards were withdrawing from the festival. By this time the sun had slipped away, and only flickering torchlights and the clear light of the moon were illuminating the evening. So Demi suddenly stopped. So how could so much horror come to pass under our very noses, and all of us being none the wiser? Because we have a count who is derelict in his duties. My Lord Baron wishes to hold a vote of no confidence. All of the barons are accounted for here today. We are doing it tonight." Bartleby turned around in a rage and he drew his blade. So too did Sir Ghoul Guizarn and the rest of the house guard. "What treachery is this?" demanded Sir Ghoul. "No treachery," said Baron O'Cara. "Only all the barons coming together and seeing things all too clearly." "You too, O'Cara," said Bartleby. "I always respected you. I would hear you out too, but not like this, not this farce of an evening, in private, where the lords of Meratt can share honest words, not riling this mob in a great show of popular force." "So come to our estate," said Aurelius. "I will gladly host us there. We can debate, we can make this a consensus of lords, if the common folk here make you uncomfortable." The other barons had come around as well. The citizens of Stachys were instead stepping away from the lords and their house guards. Either self-preservation instincts had set in, or else Demi had enthralled them to withdraw from her position atop the high stage using her bardic powers. Either way, Vort, Crabby, and Voynam were closing in around Bartleby. Each had house guards of their own with them. "Do not accept this invite, my lord," said Sir Ghoul. "Look at these lords. They would not allow this matter to come to a vote if it were not already a foregone conclusion." "And what do you propose, Sir Ghoul?" said Bartleby desperately, as he could tell he was outnumbered, and he did not fancy his chances of fighting his way out of there. "When the laws of men fall short for us, let the laws of the gods guide us. I am your champion, Count Lothide. I wear the key of Abadar, the god of cities, the Wealth Father. He has ever blessed and looked down kindly on Taldor, and here I ask for his patronage now. You have a great cleric among your number, and you have a champion of your own. I speak, of course, of Sir Marius." Marius felt himself flush hot. Sir Ghoul continued. "Cleric Pyson, I request you draw up a sacred circle. Call the power of Abadar forth. Let him judge who is just and who is treacherous. Come, Marius, face me in the circle, you representing your lord, and me representing mine. Long have I asked you if you had an ulterior motive, and long have you lied to my face. Let us see now if you have a shred of honor intact." Marius stepped forward. Aurelius whispered to him. "Don't accept, Marius. We already have the votes. Let's just do it that way. If you fight him and you lose, I don't know what that means." But something in Sir Ghoul's words spoke to him, and he had been feeling bad about his dishonesty anyway, and he did sometimes worry about how Abadar might choose to judge his choices. He was afraid of his own words, even as they left his lips. "I accept." Aurelius planted his palm to his face. "I hope you know what you're doing," said O'Cara to Marius. "I hope I do too." The assembled armies parted for the aging halfling cleric, who seemed quite excited to have arrived in town just in time for such a dramatic and sacred undertaking. He cast a consecrate spell on the ground, and he announced that this was hallowed ground, and that Abadar himself now sat in judgment. Sir Ghoul drew forth his rapier, and swished it a few times, and he hoisted his kite shield as well. "Come, Marius," he said, "let's settle this under the eyes of our god. He will see through your lies and lay bare the truth at the heart of it." Marius stepped forward. "The truth is you serve a poor leader, Ghoul, in service to poorer masters. If you do not see it now, maybe you will see it after. Ghoul snarled and whipped his blade forward. Marius batted it aside and popped out the blade on his gauntlet, sending it flying forward with a mighty staggering punch that Ghoul only barely caught with his own shield. Even catching it, the staggering force of the blow caused him to step backwards a few paces. His weapon was quicker this time, drawing a bright bead of blood across Marius's left cheek. First blood. It'll only be the last that counts. Back and forth they darted, one in and then one out. They were evenly matched. Marius was bigger and stronger, but Ghoul was faster, and his technique more refined. Then Ghoul saw a gap in Marius's defenses. He went in for an abdominal strike, sliding the blade through Marius's stomach. Marius felt a dizzying pain as the thin blade of the rapier went through the links of his chain shirt, burying deep and drawing vital blood. But Marius ignored and pushed forward, their shields locked. Ghoul's blade was stuck inside Marius. He couldn't pull it out. Marius withdrew the blade from Coriana's fist, making it a bludgeoning gauntlet. He swung it with all force towards Ghoul's exposed face. With a terrible crack, the weapon delivered a single terrifying knockout blow. Ghoul was knocked off his feet, and he collapsed, unconscious, in the circle. Marius dropped his shield and gripped the rapier that was still sticking out of his stomach. He held it in position, fearing if it would come out of his body it would drag his entrails out with it. The pain was great, and he dropped to one knee for a moment, but he mastered his pain, and he stood back up. With one hand still holding the rapier in place, he held his other hand to the air. "Sir Marius has won," announced the cleric. "The judgment of the god of cities has been made." Demi and Rankle rushed over to heal Marius's wounds as they removed the blade. Count Lothide looked like he was getting ready to flee, but O'Cara and Voynam's forces in particular gathered in around him. "Come peacefully," instructed Baron O'Cara. "Release your men." Titus Lothide called to his cousin. "My cousin, I will ride to the capital with my men. Your father will hear of this. I will have you released at once." O'Cara ignored Titus as the young lord wheeled around and rode off into the darkness. His men did not stop him. Bartleby offered his wrists up as O'Cara manacled them. "You really think this foolish boy will make a decent count?" said Bartleby bitterly, looking at Aurelius. "Oh, I'm not planning on that," said Aurelius, smiling. "I will focus on being the best baron I can be. That job will go to Count O'Cara." Bartleby looked up in shock. "So that's how they won you over, is it?" he asked stubbornly. "Partly," said Count O'Cara, "but everything you heard here tonight was true. Had you been a count worthy of the title, I would have supported you every step of the way. I think you know that." The rest of Bartleby's soldiers were released, but Bartleby himself was kept by Count O'Cara under house guard. It was not long before Sir Ghoul himself awoke, nursed back to health by Cleric Pison. The man roared in pain, cursing out his god for betraying his trust, before, in a fit of horror, he realized that the magic normally granted to him by the divine force above was suddenly denied him. In a panic of rage and fear, Sir Ghoul also fled into the night. Some hours later, the various barons and their entourages joined Aurelius and the others at the Bettany estate, where Aurelius had plans to put them up for the night. The barons confirmed the appointment of Count O'Cara that very night, before retiring to their various guest quarters. Count O'Cara remained to discuss some final details with Aurelius and his company. "Tomorrow I will march to the Palace of Birdsong," said Count O'Cara. "I am not the only one to observe a strange presence there, am I?" "No, indeed you are not," said Diyanah angrily. "Then you understand why I'm going to ask for your help to search out the palace and make sure it's safe to move into," said O'Cara. Aurelius replied, "We'll help you fully investigate the palace first thing tomorrow, before Sir Ghoul or Lord Titus have a chance to get reinforcements or do anything else untoward." Then suddenly there was a shimmer of light in the center of the living room, and quite abruptly Martella Lothide was there, in the flesh, her lean halfling valet beside her. Aurelius stood surprised for a moment, and then quickly said, "Count O'Cara, the Lady Martella of House Lothide." "Of course, we've met before," said O'Cara. "So, Martella, you are behind all of this." "There's no time for idle chit-chat. I can see that you are the Count now," she said, "and I assume your promise to my friends still stands." "Yes, your friends have explained the plan to me. You wish to be Duchess, and you need my support to oust your father, right?" "Yes," said Martella, "and there is absolutely no time to waste. Unfortunately, word is already reaching him about what has transpired here. I have to make my move tomorrow, which means I need you with me right now." "Very well, then. Let us be away, Martella," said Count O'Cara. "My friends, if I could ask you of one more thing before I go. Please make sure the Palace of Birdsong is safe for my return. I know I've asked for much, but I will compensate you for your troubles." "Okay, Count, enough goodbyes. Step closer, please." And just as suddenly, Martella and O'Cara and her halfling companion were gone in the familiar shimmer of a teleportation spell. There was one final button on that night, a note sent by animal messenger from Lady Lucrezia Marthane. "Dear Marius," it said, "in our haste during our flight, I had not the time to tell you, but Lord Titus and I were finally wed, in a short ceremony under a willow tree not far from the festival grounds. He agreed to let me keep my maiden name as well, as evidenced by our marriage papers, which I can provide separately when needed. Unfortunately, in his haste, Lord Titus took a spill as he rode across the Gold Canyon Bridge, and he went tumbling into the canyon. I guess you should have put some higher railings on the side of that thing when you built it. He cracked his neck during the fall and died immediately. As his widow, I am claiming as my inheritance the position of Tribune of Newtown. In light of the shifting politics, I moved to have Newtown removed from the Lothidar barony and incorporated into the Stachys barony, where it is more accurately situated geographically. Hopefully this pleases you. Please tell Count O'Kara the same. Looking forward to discussing our new closer alliance in the coming weeks." The Palace of Birdsong, Meratt County, Taldor, 4718. As they had promised to Count O'Kara, the following day, as soon as they had awoken, Aurelius, Marius, Demi, Diyanah, and Rankle made their way to the palace. It had been abandoned by the Lothid guards. If Ghoul had come by the previous night, he had already moved on. Slowly but surely they explored the grounds, and then the rooms, looking for signs of anything suspicious. They explored the carriage house and stables, the game room, the library, the pantry, the seneschal's office, which Ghoul had obviously cleared out only a few hours ago, the arcane laboratory, which Demi knew her way around, an armory, a well-concealed panic room, and a secure vault which contained a number of magical items. At one point, while they were searching, Rankle, in his guise as Willem, along with Goethe and Sepsinia, went to explore the cottages on the outer grounds, while the rest of the party made their way up to a drawing room, adjacent to the portrait gallery room on the second level, which Diyanah had previously explored with Sepsinia. And there they found a large table with a map of Taldor laid out, multiple colored pins inserted into it, representing the political leanings of the various lords of Taldor. "Looks like we weren't the only ones considering the broader political game," mused Aurelius. Then, as they looked over the map, they all suddenly felt at once, as if the air was being sucked out of their lungs. They tried to move, but they couldn't. It felt as though their limbs had suddenly atrophied. A slow clap filled the air, and a man stepped in, an unmistakable man, tall and dark, Panavar Lothid. He set a small hourglass with brightly colored sand on the mantelpiece before he addressed them. They could see him keeping an eye on it as he spoke. "I suppose congratulations are in order to the new lords of the Stachys barony. You probably think you've won a great victory. You've established a northern line. By now your allies will have convinced the Grand Duchess Tiberan to publicly support the loyalist claims of Princess Eutropia, and deny the imperialist Grand Strategos. And of course she will spur others to do the same. Lady Helenara Lorsus, who controls the Yellow Canal, will come out with her support, as will Grand Duchess Malia Denzani of Kazan Prefecture, and, of course, Lady Demetria's patron, Grand Duchess Breatisa Falspar of North Tandak. Kriris and the other two provinces will go with the majority, won't they, since they like to remain so apolitical. So let's count them as yours as well. Porthmost Prefecture has ever been lorded over by a tyrant who desires nothing but to remain independent, so Maxillar won't be able to rely on him for help either. His only loyalty, therefore, will remain constrained to the prefectures south of the line, Lingyan, Ligos, Moda, Sofra, and White March. Am I correct so far? Very, very clever. Of course it's not a complete win, is it? Aven Prefecture here is the one glaring hole in your northern line. Could the master tactician, that is Grand Strategos Maxillar Pytherius, consider using the dangerous, wind-swept wastes east of the World's Edge Mountains to come at you from both sides? A classic pincer move, perhaps. He certainly has more soldiers than you, even if you claim more land. I don't know. Maybe you're not as close to victory as you think you are. Oh, wait, silly me. I've done all this talking and I haven't even bothered to introduce myself. If you don't recognize me from the portraits, one of which you so crudely defaced in my old home, I am Panavar Lothid. Though yes, as you've probably gathered, I've had many names before that. Now you might also be asking yourselves if I have just stopped time for you. The answer is yes. Yes, I have. The reason I have done so is to demonstrate to you how hopelessly outmatched you are. You don't even know who your true enemy is, do you? Well, then give me a chance to monologue at you for a bit. You may find it enlightening. I have been watching you all for some time now, from afar, and you may be interested to know that I find you all fascinating. So fear not, I don't plan to kill you all today. In fact, I'm hopeful you will someday come around to my way of seeing things, at least some among your number. Where to begin? Perhaps with Sir Marius, as he has presented himself in Meratt County. We have a lot in common, you and I. Now, of course, you may well be asking yourself, what does a half-orc from the back country have in common with one of the High Lords of Taldor? Well, let's just say, I have a soft spot for anyone with the ambition to better their station. Look at you, born to be a savage of the hinterlands, but self-made into a barkeep. And what's this now? A knight, maybe? Wonderful, wonderful. I too was born with a great ambition. But of course the station I was born to was among the very highest in the land. So my ambition, I'm afraid to say, was all the greater for it. I was a man of middle years when the god Aradin died. Now, of course, you might be thinking, but Panavar, that was over 120 years ago. Why, yes, that's true. I've aged rather well, wouldn't you say? The death of a god had a profound impact on me. If even the gods could die, what did that mean for all of us? What did that mean for our afterlives? I made a critical decision at that moment. I would choose not to die, not ever. And that in turn brings me to the beautiful Lady Demetria, of Numeria originally, if you didn't know. It may surprise you, Demi, to learn that I know exactly what you are. I wonder if your companions do. You see, I studied your kind, the children of the stars, as the Khelids of your homeland call you. An ironic name, as none of you have ever known any kind of childhood at all. He turned away from Demi and looked at the others. They are golems, you see, constructs, manufactured by the advanced science of the Androphans, an ancient people, contemporaries of old Aslant, who mastered the sciences much as the Aslanti mastered magic. They built ships capable of traversing the stars themselves, and all the challenges of this world they drew upon their great knowledge of science to solve. Their solution to this riddle of mortality was yourself, that which they call the android, a body made of machinery, animated by magnetism and other poorly understood galvanic forces, but capable of housing a living human soul. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? Maybe not so much. He propped up a small cloth doll on the mantelpiece beside the hourglass, which was about halfway done running through. This is a poppet, a little artifice I constructed myself. It has been enchanted to be a receptacle for a soul. Let me make it more plain. He then carefully cast another spell, which Aurelius recognized to be a form of the magic jar spell. Demi suddenly felt as if she were being drawn out of her own body, and then, suddenly, everyone looked very large around her, and she realized she was inhabiting the animated poppet. There we go. That is Demi now, a ghost in a doll. It's disconcerting, isn't it, the moment you realize the illusion of syncretization is a false one. That is, of course, the theory that mind, body, and soul are inextricably linked, and that we're a composition of all three. We're not, as it turns out. Demi is no different from any of us, just a soul in a jar. Her jar is just built a little differently from ours. The Androphans figured it out, how to use science to move the soul from one vessel to another. But to my great dismay, I learned something else about the Androphan constructs, about the Star Children. The Androphan experiment was a failure. The androids never worked as they were supposed to. 100 years. That is how long a soul encased in an android chassis typically endures. Beyond this time, a kind of languishing occurs. It is no disease or sickness as we think of it, unless it be a sickness of the soul, perhaps. In time, androids choose to self-terminate, bringing an end to their mortal lives and proffering their souls up to the judgment of the gods. You think yourself a formidable machine, don't you? Well, I'm afraid in time you will die, like any mortal woman of flesh and blood. Why is this? Because the gods deemed it so. The poison of Tishalas affects us all, even you, Demi. The ravages of time may affect some faster than others, but inevitably and inexorably all shall die and be judged. This, for whatever reason, is the will of the gods. And defying this will requires considerable cunning and the breaking of some fundamental rules. This was the key to my understanding. I could say more, but I won't. Why not? Well, this brings me to Baron Aurelius, because as I discovered, the riddle of immortality can be solved. by a sufficiently dedicated wizard. I did it, so could you. I have been watching you from afar, as I have your friends, and I see great potential in you right now. You'd need to shift your studies, of course, from a focus on illusions to a focus on abjuration and divination, but I believe given time you'd find it. In many ways you've already followed in my footsteps. Do you know the provenance of your familiar? I have no idea how you acquired him, but I made him in my mid-30s, or maybe my early 40s. I forget exactly. The Raven Man, they used to call me. I had taken up sculpting in soft metals at the time. He indicated the raven at the end of his cane. I have one too, you see. I constructed a number of them to hand out to my disciples. That one I remember well. I gave it to a young man named Eros Glendower in Opara, who was fascinated by my study into the psychopomps. Ooh, a bit of a giveaway there, I suppose. Don't want to give you too many clues after all. Regardless, that man's reach exceeded his grasp. Last I heard, he had turned himself into a mouse or some such silliness. If you attempt to follow the path of the Immaculate Circle, I recommend you take a little more caution than he did. Now you're probably wondering if I'm being genuine about that offer. Why you should ever choose to side with me when I seem like such a villain in your eyes, supporting Maxillar Pytherius, the brute himself, who murdered your father. Am I? Truth be told, Maxillar is a blunt instrument. I prefer him to Eutropia and my troublesome niece Martella, because he will be easier to control. When you've figured out how to live forever, the position of the Emperor will lie ever out of reach. People would object to a god-king, wouldn't they? But if I control who gets the throne, then I will rule forever, the puppeteer, pulling everyone's strings. Now I see you as you are here today, motivated by vengeance. Well, let me tell you something fun about living forever. You never ever have to feel vengeful again. You don't like Maxillar Pytherius? Don't worry. Time will do to him what it does to everything else. Age and death will be your vengeance, and you won't have to move a finger, as you will remain evergreen. But of course you need time to really think on my words. There is still too much passion in you now to see the truth of them. All you need to know for now is that while you think you are winning, it's only because you don't see all the cards I hold. Which finally, and inevitably, brings me to Diyanah. Ah, Diyanah, you poor lost scion of a great, but let's face it, somewhat faded house. The scions of the Frascati family were once legendary heroes of the Katheeran Wars, but now they are mostly celebrated for their mediocre wine. I prefer Lingian varietals myself. You disappeared, didn't you, for a few days when you were 6 years old? You don't know what happened to you, do you? But you had this special marker on your hand. He peeled off Diyanah's glove. A perfect, immaculate circle. A marker that my followers left behind for those children who would be a good fit for the events to come. Later you would succumb to great fits of rage. Your family sent you to a monastery to master yourself, but for all your training, all the good works of the monks of Irori, your rage was never sated. How is that possible? 10 years, 15 years of training, and still the anger would not quell? 'Tis no secret to me that you have mastered all the arts of the Auroran path, the fabled dragon style, the spinning kick of Lungwa, the very stylish key solar plexus punch. I've seen you do all of them. Very impressive, but still so angry, I see. Why? Well, now to reveal my biggest trick of all. It's not your anger. It never was. You are a vessel too, my friend. You've had a hitchhiker since you were a boy. You see, as living Archwizard, Panavar Lothide, I was summoned to the capital by the Emperor himself when his child had died. The Twilight Child, the true heir, and I was tasked with stitching his spirit back together for the clerics to properly resurrect him. But did I do this? No, of course not. What a powerful card in a game of politics to come. I needed a boy about the same age, someone that could carry the spirit until it would be of use to me, which it now is. No, I'm afraid I didn't bring the soul popper to demonstrate what Demi is. That was just a bit of fun. You can go back now. Panavar abruptly dismissed the soul jar spell, and Demi was shunted back into her body. No, I brought it to fetch the one thing I needed to secure my control over the country, the lost spirit of the Twilight Child, which miracle of miracles you have inadvertently brought to my own home. Come to me, young Marius. Your new home awaits. Panavar slowly pulled a spirit out of Diyanah, and as he did so, the symbol on Diyanah's hand began to fade away. I now possess the true heir to the throne. I will have him resurrected. The people will rally behind him. I will make sure he supports Pytherius in his claim. You will lose. Yet you amuse me, so I will leave you here alive. Good luck with whatever your plans are." And then, just before the final grains of sand slipped through the hourglass, signaling the end of his time-stop spell, Panavar collected the poppet and the timepiece, and with a familiar glimmering shimmer, he teleported away. As he stepped into the ethereal void beyond, for a brief terrible moment they saw a creature with him, a creature of nightmares, a stalking, spider-like creature with a vaguely human face. Then they were gone, leaving behind only the sinking feeling in each of the heroes of the terrible truths he had shared. End of chapter. Hi there, I'm the Mythkeeper. Thank you so much for watching. You've just watched the final episode, the season finale of Season 2 of my Pathfinder 616 War for the Crown. Let's get right into this. This was, I'm sure, quite different from the events played out in many other playgroups. In many ways, there was no final encounter with Bartleby. By the time they get around to exploring the Palace of Birdsong, it's not so much a dungeon replete with enemies as it is kind of scouting it out. They ended up inviting Bartleby to their own festival so that they could do this vote of no confidence and kind of oust him. And that ended up being a sort of semi-finale, but I knew that I wanted something with a little more narrative punch than just, hey, there's a vote and they win and now they're on to the next adventure. And I really like it when there's a bit of personal enmity towards the overall campaign's big bad. So I made the choice, I'm going to introduce Panavar Lothid in the flesh. The other thing is, if you've got a villain and they have time stop listed on their list of spells, that's like Chekhov's time stop. You kind of want to use that at some point. What a treat to be able to essentially allow him to monologue at the players for an extended period of time and give each of them something personal to reflect on that they can then take with them into their next adventures and can potentially fuel their animosity towards him in particular and make them want to complete their mission successfully. So hopefully that was as satisfying a conclusion to episode 2, more of a narrative conclusion than a combat conclusion. For all of you watching, as it was for me and my players, we had a lot of fun with it. We will be coming back with Season 3 in the not too distant future. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, do all the good things, and I'll see you on the next one.